And I will introduce Mike Carroll. I have had the pleasure of working with Mike for several years now. He's on the board of Creative Commons, on the founding board of Science Commons and CC Learn, and he's a professor of law at Villanova.
Thank you very much, John. And I am going to start. So I'm going to pick up on the science point, but let me do a copyright framing for, not everyone in the room is scientists, many more of us relate to the copyright system. I want to make a general point about this relationship. As Jamie said, there's been all this push to harmonize copyright. And when we tell ourselves, well, what's the purpose? At least the purpose for the economic rights is this promotion of progress of learning, of dissemination of information. And what is the connection between exclusive rights and the dissemination of information? If you go back to the 18th century roots of copyright, it was a sense that dissemination was a very expensive, costly process that required an incentive for investment. Exclusive rights provided monopoly power that generated that incentive. So exclusive rights are merely the means to the end. And what we're in the middle of is a transition of how do we adapt. We want to keep the end the same, but there's pressure on the means. One of the things we've learned about that connection is if the economics are what tells us what the means are, then we should realize that a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't make sense when the economics for different forms of knowledge generation and dissemination are quite different. So we've been harmonizing around a one-size-fits-all package of rights that's supposed to apply across all domains of culture, knowledge, and information, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So there are two ways to get out of that box. One is to use the private ordering, the contracts and other forms of a private arrangement to take the pressure off the one-size-fits-all. The other is to use the limitations and exceptions in the copyright system to adapt the system to different forms of knowledge, right? Right now, as Jamie pointed out, we've been using geographically different limitations and exceptions rather than limitations and exceptions for different domains of knowledge across the globe. So in this respect, I want to now call our attention to the authorship and the copyrights in scholarship in general and scientific scholarship in particular. And look for a minute at the economics there and then look at the way copyright, the one-size-fits-all, is functioning and suggest that copyright is not doing its job very well for some of the reasons that John just pointed out. And then just briefly point a finger at some of the things we could do. So initially in the 18th century, the person who needed that economic incentive was the publisher. The cost of paper was extremely expensive. And the risk of another publisher entering the market was significant enough that there needed to be some exclusive rights. At the time, authors self-financed or relied on patrons. But then the royalty for authors emerged, and with that royalty payment, then an incentive for authorship became part of the copyright story. And so certainly in the music business, in popular culture, in the movie business, royalties to the creators are part of the system. Let's keep in mind that copyright is an author's right. It is not a publisher's right, right? So if we care about the economics, we should care about the incentives for the authors. It makes sense to give some form of exclusivity to authors that need royalties to do their jobs. These authors do not need that royalty, right? Scientists are paid for with public funds, with university tuition, with other forms of indirect tax financing. They do not get a royalty for writing these papers, okay? So already the economics are out of sync with the assumption built into copyright, right? So here is I just did a quick search for an article in the PubMed database of abstracts, right? These are science. And I want to point out, let's look at how copyright functions in this domain and then ask whether this makes sense. We're inside the walls of Duke University, a very wealthy university. And we may not, when we go out on the web from a computer connected to the web at Duke University, we don't realize that we have a golden key that allows us to move through gates without our even noticing it. So this is a public database available to the world, right? We go to this database. But if I want to read the full text of this article, here's a link, right? So this is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, right? A premier medical journal in the United States. Because I'm at Duke University, because Duke University has an agreement with the copyright holder, right, that recognizes the internet protocol address of this machine, if I push on this button, right, it will load the full text of the article. So if I'm a researcher sitting inside the walls of Duke, this feels like the web. I've just passed through a gate and I didn't even notice it. We'll simulate this. If we pretend that we're not at Duke, right? So we pulled up a proxy server to fool the web into thinking that I'm now a computer. I'm outside the wall now. I'm a researcher in a developing country. I'm a researcher in a poorly financed institution that cannot pay the journal publishers the way, right? When I click on that, that's not what I want. I'm sorry. We tried to. This one? Okay. Here's what happens when you click on that link in other parts of the world. When you're not inside the wall, you don't get the full text, you get this screen, right? Please sign in for access options, or if you'd like, you can purchase this article for 24 hours for $15. Okay? Right? So one of the problems in the system is that the author of this article is in a system where it is where their collective incentive is to give that copyright away to the journal publisher. They don't need it, so I'll give it away. I don't need a royalty payment, take it. The journal publisher then uses it to sell access back to the university. And if you're inside the wealthy university, it feels to the researcher like no problem, because that researcher doesn't see that this is what the access picture is outside the walls. And if you're a researcher in the other parts of the web and you want to get access to the knowledge, you keep hitting the wall, right? And that's a problem if the things we've learned about knowledge webs are that we don't know who the next great inventor is. We don't know when the next great scientific insight is going to come from. And if we care about the dissemination of knowledge, the health outcomes that follow from the dissemination of knowledge, then we want to maximize the number of people who have access to the literature, because that's how the process gets started. And if we have a copyright system that's designed to control access when the authors of the information don't need that, when the publishers have this open digital platform in order to make the literature accessible, then the system is not doing its job. All right, I'll submit that the system is not doing its job in the scholarly realm because there are far too many access barriers to be justified on the underlying economics of the system. Now, let's look at the alternative. Oops, sorry. All right. So what are the alternatives? As John mentioned and as Jamie mentioned, the system is doing its best in using private means, but doing its best is not great. So one version of the response is that some authors understand that there's an access problem and are publishing in a different mode of journal publishers. Publishers that are designed to use the digital platform are built for that, like the Public Library of Science. Public Library of Science is a peer-reviewed journal where the author pays the funding for the cost of coordinating the peer review and the editorial functions that are performed by the journal, and access to the public is free, right? So anywhere on the web, if you have an internet connection, there are no barriers. We all get to be Duke researchers when it's the Public Library of Science, right? And in terms of what do you get to do with the articles, can I machine read? Can I do the kinds of research that John wants? Yes, because Public Library of Science has used the Creative Commons license that says all you need to do is give our authors credit because that's what they care about. They don't need a royalty, but they sure need credit because that is the key coin of the realm in science, right? So we've tailored the system, at least in some parts. But Public Library of Science and that model of scientific publishing is a minority, and the large commercial publishers, the large society publishers that continue to suck the copyrights out of the university in order to sell access back to the university are not particularly attracted to this model. So what's the response? Well, a recent response is to say, let's again remind ourselves of the economics of the authorship here. What are these articles reporting? They are reporting the results of very expensive research, right? So if we care about incentives, we want to know who paid for that research. And if you want to, look at who paid Stephen King to write his most recent novel? Well, he got an advance from the publisher, right, in order so he could run off. So the publisher's using the copyright to finance the research that novelists do, that recording, Guns N' Roses, we're still waiting for the next album as Axl Rhodes sits in a music studio because the record company keeps paying him to be there. The publishers didn't pay for the research that was reported in that article. The taxpayers paid for that research. So we have an author who doesn't need a royalty. We have the taxpayers paying the cost of creating the information, and yet we're giving the copyrights away and controlling access to this. So finally, the system is beginning to react, right? So recently, the National Institutes of Health has said, we paid for it, we're going to make sure it's accessible, right? So now, instead of only getting that abstract, in the future, that article will be available to all of us on the web with a 12-month delay. The publishers are crying and screaming that this is going to put them out of business with a very generous delay so that any researcher who needs that information now still has to stay inside the walled garden system. And it's only people who can wait a full year to find out the latest research that will benefit from this system. So it is hardly the revolution that that we perhaps need, but it is a step in the right direction where we've started to focus on the economics of the information in a particular sector and said we need to adapt the system to these economics. In this case, public access for publicly funded research is an important step and goal. Separately, at Science Commons, we've been trying to make the case to authors that they are authors and that those copyrights matter because they are in an information ecology and they are both producers and consumers, and they are in effect polluting the system when they give away all their rights under copyright because they are blocking the access. And so to sort of try to, in the way that we used to have to convince people they needed to recycle their garbage, here, we need to convince scientific authors they need to take care of their copyrights and not just blow them out of the university fully, but reserve some rights to themselves. And at Science Commons, we've given them the tools to do that because it is complex. Scientists don't want to learn about copyright, and frankly, they shouldn't have to. So we've written a set of easy-to-use, one-page contractual addendum that these scientists and other scholarly authors can use. The publisher says, here's the deal, please give me your copyright, and the author can say, mostly okay, but here's the deal with copyright, right? I'm going to override yours. And so this is a tool for authors to manage the copyrights that we, the public, give them in the public interest. All right. But individual authors don't want to have to do that, and individual authors feel powerless as against the large publishers. So the newest innovation is for the authors to begin to work together. We have seen authors work together before. Collecting societies, in effect, are a form of collective action by authors. And here we have the authors of the Harvard University Faculty of Arts and Sciences, who recently in February came together and said, we don't want to negotiate copyright one by one. We don't want to have to go pit individual author against large publisher. We, the faculty, think that access matters. We, the faculty, collectively commit to making access part of the environment. And the way we will do that is we will say, we hereby give to the university the freedom to make this available on the internet, any articles that we write, and we will give the publisher an addendum that says, sorry, I can't give you the whole copyright. I already gave a license to my university to make this openly accessible. And this is a number of European universities are already doing this, and a recent recommendation from the Association of more than 700 European universities said we collectively need to manage our own copyrights because we are polluting the system. We need to be a more active participant in how the access system is developed, using the copyrights which are at the heart of this system to redesign it. And these are all to the good. But there is still a set of issues that individual authors, even when acting collectively, may not get right. There's still some issues that they may not anticipate as they renegotiate with their publishers. So they may say, I care about access. Well, what about preservation? Have you made sure that there are rights for libraries to make digital archives and to repurpose the digital archives as new formats come up? We cannot ask the authors to think ahead, even when they're acting collectively, and think about all of these reuses of this literature that they need to be made in the future. And that's where the law comes in. Right? That's where the limitations and exceptions to copyright need to be establish that balance that Jamie started us out with. And we need to recognize that libraries, archives, other forms of access providers, and preservationists need a baseline harmonized set of abilities to preserve this literature, make access in the future, make machine-readable access part of the system, right? And that we need to make that part of the law rather than ask the private actors of the private copyright holders who really don't care that much about the copyrights because of their situation in the system to do it. And with that, I think I close. Thanks.